Welcome to Climate Reflections, the SRM 360 podcast. We discuss sunlight reflection methods, or SRM, ideas to reduce the impacts of climate change by reflecting sunlight away from the Earth. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Irvine, and I'm a climate scientist who has studied SRM since 2009. For this episode, we're bringing you a live podcast discussion for the Degrees Global Forum in South Africa, sharing our panel on perspectives from leading African SRM experts. Enjoy.
Good morning. Thanks to Degrees for putting this on. This is a fantastic gathering of people, many of whom wouldn't be here thanks to the work that Degrees has been doing for the last few years. So I'm Dr. Pete Irvine, editorial director of SRM360.org, which is a new nonprofit. I'm also a researcher at the University of Chicago's Climate Systems Engineering Initiative, and I'm your host for this panel. So, as this is the world's first and largest conference on solar engineering today in Africa, we thought it'd be appropriate to open with a panel discussion focused on African perspectives on solar engineering. And I'm delighted to be joined by 4 expert panelists who will sit in this order. We're going to have first Portia next to me, Dr. Portia Williams. If you'd like to come up, I'll introduce you. So Dr. Portia Williams is a research scientist at the Science and Technology Policy Research Institute of Ghana's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. She works at the intersection of science, policy, and economics with a focus on climate change adaptation in agriculture, energy, and water. She has contributed to IPCC reports as well as the development of African Union climate strategies. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Ernest Ofori. Ernest is program lead for mitigation, carbon dioxide removal, and solar geoengineering at the Green Africa Youth Organization in Ghana. He works on youth-led climate education, decarbonization, and engaging African youth in emerging strategies like carbon removal and SRM. Then we have Professor Nana Browne Klutse, climatologist and vice chair of the IPCC Working Group 1. Her research focuses on African climate systems, particularly the monsoon, and on transforming complex climate data into information that can guide policy action. Welcome to the stage. And finally, we have Professor Babatunde Abiodun. He is a climate scientist and lecturer at the University of Cape Town, our hosts here, and holds a research chair in ocean atmospheric modeling. His work focuses on regional climate dynamics and Africa's climate response to SRM. Thanks. So, Ernest, Africa is a young continent, has the youngest population with a median age of under 20 today. The current population across those 54 countries stands at about 1.5 billion, but that's projected to grow to 2.5 billion by 2050 and approaching 4 billion by 2100. As our youngest panelist, what sense do you have of Africa's future and how it will evolve over these coming decades?
Thank you very much, Peter, for this question. What I see a future brimming with opportunities, but fraught with challenges. If you check the statistics, and if it is true, by 2050, 2.5 billion people in Africa the number automatically will be increased by 2.5 billion, or as 2.5 billion by 2050. And if you look at the statistics, it means nearly 1 out of 4 people on this planet will be African. The question here is, are we going to be leaders of this just transition, shaping just transition conversations, or we will be just mere people or young people that will be caught in the same climate injustice, will be caught in these decisions that are happening in Africa that majority of us do not have a say in. I think nobody or any of us want to be in that position where we would be incapacitated, where we wouldn't have the opportunity to speak up, to be at the table where decision is made. So I say that it will be very imperative that young Africans who now have massive potentials will be invested in. Investment in capacity to be able to dialogue, to be able to make decisions that would affect this future and the next future generations. And I believe that every one of us here, particularly our African folks, the young people here, have something in you that is very unique. But that's something, if it is not polished, if it is not given that opportunity to grow, it might as well die. And this demographic I'm talking about is the demographic that have the opportunity or have the ability to keep the legacy of our scientists who are currently making decisions on the continent. So I say let's invest in the youth, let's invest in capacity building education, let's invest in promoting some of these potentials of these young people to help us face what is coming in the future.
Yeah. So Africa, a country with a lot of potential, but with quite a lot of peril. So I guess, Nana, can you give us a sense of how Africa's climate is changing and how this might impact the future here?
Yeah. Thank you. I think the situation of the climate change is experienced everywhere. The impact is more felt in developing countries or countries that we describe as vulnerable countries because the adaptive capacity is low. So particularly in Africa, we're seeing intense droughts, we're seeing intense floods. In areas where it didn't used to flood, it's now flooding. We have experienced and still experiencing coastal erosion, which is happening at a very fast rate. We have seen farmers or agriculture being affected and affecting food security as well. Now we're talking about diseases that's changing in dynamics. We have pests and also new species of animals and diseases showing up. That's, we attribute most of these to climate change, but we also know that we have anthropogenic activities as well, like activities that also affect the land and the environment that we live in and exacerbates the impact of climate change as well. So in Africa, we have very, I would say, difficult situation when it comes to climate change. And we all know the contribution of Africa in terms of global warming is very low. And then we have this ethical dilemma where we contribute less to global warming, but have great impact of the climate change, the consequence of global warming. So we have been advocating, and on the various conference of parties, we advocating for support for Africa to help with vulnerable groups, indigenous groups. We have, in the past, been adapting in our own way, with or without support from other government. The rate at which it's happening, it's beyond the capacity for our adaptation, because we used to adapt to climate change that is occurring slowly, but because now it's happening more often and different from how we have known it, adapting has become a problem or more challenging than it used to be. So on tables or when we attend conference of parties, we're discussing loss and damage, we're discussing adaptation and ways to even contribute to mitigation. So if you see some of us in research in climate, we're just not doing research resulting to information for adaptation, but also even contribute to mitigation, although we know we add less to the issue of global warming or let's say greenhouse gas emission. Yeah.
I think that was a great overview.
Thank you.
Babatunde, I guess focusing in, maybe I'm going slightly off script here, so don't be too surprised, but I'm focusing in on Cape Town. What do you think some of the biggest concerns in South Africa are for climate change?
For climate change?
Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest concern is the impact on water availability, fresh water availability. Because we know with the increase in temperature, then we have more evaporation, then that means we have less water available for river basins and so on, and then the decrease in precipitation as well. So given that Southern Africa is in an arid region, so we take water very, very seriously. I mean, you know the issue of the Cape Town drought in 2015 to 2017. So anything that we touch that water availability, we are very, very concerned about it, and that's what climate change is doing.
And is it fair to say, I mean, if the population's also rising very rapidly in Africa, you have, even if you had the same amount of water, twice as many people.
Yeah, that's another driver, of it. So increase in population, decrease in water availability, that may lead to a serious problem.
Yeah. So Portia, I mean, is it fair to say that Africa is home to some of the most climate vulnerable nations? And if so, what can be done about that?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. And this is kind of widely accepted. Even from the last two cycle of assessments from the IPCC, Africa was identified as such. And I think three key things, in addition to what Nana touched on, is driving this. And the first one is the high exposure. And so we are not talking only about hazards, but then high exposure to droughts, to floods, to cyclones, which are kind of threatening key economic sectors like agriculture, like water, health, infrastructure, among others. The other point also is our low adaptive capacity, which is kind of affecting our ability to respond. And that's, you talk about financial resources, we talk about infrastructure as well, and then institutional capacities even to effectively respond. And I think the last point that is driving this is our deep systematic inequalities. We have high vulnerability, high poverty, existing socioeconomic disparities happening. And so our vulnerability is more or less, we are having socioeconomic challenges, and then we have climate impact. So in driving and how we can build our resilience, we always say that we cannot separate our development needs from climate needs. And so it's very important that amongst the key lists that we would give, like early warning system, among others, one key thing that we can do as Africa to improve our resilience is to kind of look into supporting implementation of what we call our climate action commitments. That is our NDCs. That's the only way we can kind of drive development agenda against also making sure we are addressing climate change. And I think another point is also on our research, leveraging on our research and innovation. But then the key point here I would add, and the last point, is that when we talk about research and for Africa, what is key is funding. And we know that funding drives research agenda and our ability to respond. And we need to improve on our funding ways. If I say that, it means also from the last IPCC assessment, when an assessment was done on funding for Africa climate change research, it was seen that from 1990 to 2020, about 1.5 trillion USD was targeted towards climate research in Africa. But unfortunately, we had only 14.5% coming to African institutions. The 78% went to institutions in either Northern America or in Europe that are doing research in Africa. But then we need to drive the agenda in such a way that there is much collaboration and it is more local. We have the context specificities we need that would really drive what our local knowledges are and what we really need to improve our resilience. Thank you.
Just a short follow-up question. We heard about the population trends in Africa and about the climate trends, which were both raised some challenges. Are the sort of socioeconomic trends, the trends in adaptive capacity, are those positive or are they concerning? Are we moving in the right direction?
So when we talk about socioeconomic trends, it's a challenge because we have many Africans who are really in dire need of basic human needs. We have many Africans who don't have access to even good quality water, not having any good health infrastructure, among others. So talking about our socioeconomic needs, it's a bit on the negative side. But like I said, if you're able to strategically drive our climate commitments, that's the only way we can align it with our priorities and make sure that we are really driving towards some positive outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So Ernest, I guess turning now to the focus of this conference, Solar Geoengineering, or SRM, your organization does quite a bit of outreach and educational work on this. How widely known, how widely understood are these terms, and how do you introduce them to people for the first time?
Yeah, thank you, Pete. This is very technical. SRM is basically technical. It's very difficult for people to digest the technicalities. Climate change generally is technical, but SRM is super technical for people who do not really understand some of these technicalities. We have used several approaches, but I feel we still stick to the actual way to making people appreciate the subject than going a little bit overboard. Mostly we tell people that SRM is one of the proposed strategies to help reflect or address global warming by reflecting a portion of the sun or radiation back into space. But also we make it clear that people understand that unequivocally it does not replace the primary mitigation strategy. This is just complementary.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So Babatunde, you're a climate lecturer and you teach. Do you teach on solar geoengineering, and how do your students react to learning about these ideas?
It depends on how one presents it to them. If we present it to them as a solution to climate change, a proposed solution to climate change, letting them see where we can be with mitigation, with adaptation, and then let them see that, well, it's a proposed strategy to avoid overshooting. So from that perspective, they are ready to listen to it as a proposed solution. Mm. So we tell them, and then we also let them know that when we talk about solar radiation modification, it's anything or any activity that can reflect back part of incoming radiation into the atmosphere. Some of these methods target the upper part of the atmosphere, things like stratospheric aerosol injection, in which you inject particles into the atmosphere and they reflect back. Then we have things like space mirror. We have things like thinning of clouds. So, and then some of this method also focuses on the surface, things like marine cloud brightening, things like putting mirror in the desert, or changing the albedo of land or surface. So we give them all these options, this method, to see that, look, these are ways of doing it. So with that, they are interested in knowing all this method. Why do we need to tell them all this and not just stick to a particular one? It could be that we may need more than one of this method to solve the problem. So it's better to let them know all and then tell them that, well, it seems that SAI is the most efficient way of doing it, but they need to know that it's not just only one method, we have different methods. So we let them know that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, so SAI, that's stratospheric aerosol injection, just for those who are new. But Nana, could you talk a little bit about a bit more detail about stratospheric aerosol injection and how it might affect the climate of Africa? Yeah. Are there some things that look hopeful, some things that are concerning to you?
So far, it's difficult to say how it will affect Africa because the research is still ongoing. If I use the research I do in Ghana, trying to mimic the effect of Harmattan on our weather. Harmattan is a season in West Africa that reduces, or during that season we have that cooling effect. And at that same time, we get dust influx from the Sahel area into the southern part of West Africa. So in our research, we're trying to mimic that and see if we can have that cooling effect all year round. And we see that adding more, so in that research, we add aerosols into the atmosphere in our modeling. So this is all computer work. And so we see cooling effects all through, everywhere throughout the year. And what we see is that rainfall is affected differently in different regions, in different parts of West Africa. So where you see increasing rainfall in one part, you see reduced rainfall in another part. So for temperature-wise, we can say, yes, we see cooling, but for rainfall, it's difficult to tell the direction or the signal how how it affects Africa. Africa is very sensitive to rainfall because we depend a lot on rainfall agriculture, and so it's very sensitive for our food security. We want to be sure how SRM will affect, especially rainfall in Africa. We also have humidity, we also have wind patterns and all of that to address, and in all of these other variables, it's not so clear which direction SRM is affecting in Africa. Where it has one signal this side, it's another signal on another side. So we're still very, I would say, early in our research days. In many areas in Africa, it's about the same story, not so clear how SRM is affecting or will affect Africa. So it is important that we do go into more research. There may be other local processes affecting this, obviously, because once we have different effects, it means the drivers are diverse and different. So we need to understand if SRM comes into contact with, let's say, population growth, urban heat, and all of that, what will be the effect? So it's an opportunity for a lot of research to be done over the continent.
Yeah, and quite a lot of that, some of that has already been done. I guess maybe you could talk briefly about some of the work that has been done in Africa on this.
Yeah, so currently what is happening is the modeling work and small-scale laboratory experiments, not yet in Africa on that side. So in Africa, we're basically doing the modeling of SRM, trying to understand. So happily, we have climate scientists hub in Africa that is focusing on SRM and largely supported by Degrees Fund. And also we have one of our researchers or team that's supported by Simon's Foundation. So I would say we have started, we are growing slowly. The interest is also growing in Africa and getting support from the global north as well in our research. So it is an opportunity for us to do more, looking at all aspects of climate, especially the sensitive parts that affect our economics and our government.
Great, thanks. Yeah. I guess, Babatunde, briefly, there's another one of the leading ideas is marine cloud brightening, and that's very different. It's a much more regional intervention. Could that be applied around Africa, and what effects might that have?
Yes, it can be applied, although there's only one study that has investigated that to show that if we have marine cloud brightening southeast of Atlantic Ocean, what might happen? And the result shows that, well, it enhances rainfall over West Africa, but suppresses rainfall in the Central Africa and in Southern Africa. So, in a way, it is trying to do what SAI is doing to Africa. So, however, I think we need more of that study to see if we do it in other coastal coastal region of Africa, what might be the impact?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was going to say, and if I'm right, doing it off the coast of Africa also affected the Amazon's rainfall as well. It's not just a local phenomenon.
No, the impact is not limited to Africa only, but I'm focusing on Africa. It affects other parts of the world. However, the study also shows that I think the impact we have if we do it in the Southeast Atlantic Ocean is less compared to the impact we might have if we do it in a Pacific Ocean. Yeah.
Great. Well, before we go to audience questions, I wanted to ask you a couple of open questions that you can take one or both of in order. So, do you have any final thoughts of what SRM might mean for Africa? And what can be done to make sure African perspectives shape the discourse, the development of this field? Portia.
Okay, yeah. So I think that even from the last two speakers, a lot of questions are being asked that are unanswered. But then for the research we are doing, thankfully, it's kind of aiming at deepening knowledge and understanding on SRM. And once we're able to do that, we know that we would effectively drive governance. And it's going to be effective. I'm saying that because yesterday during the session with the policymakers, we had the PIs engaging with the policymakers. Even after we had taken them through, after their session, I walked to them and I was like, how do you feel? And the response I got was, we feel we need more, and even very often. And so if we are going to drive inclusivity and make sure that our governance system is effective, voices are heard, interests are known, decisions are not just decisions, but informed decisions, then it means we really need to deepen understanding of SRM. And I think we are already in the right path doing that. And once we're able to do that, I think we would have a positive future ahead. Not the outcomes, but then at least it's going to be more inclusive engagement. We are going to hear voices in a more inclusive way, and then our voices are going to be heard in global discussions, among others. Absolutely. So I think that's the right way forward.
And just to clarify, for those who aren't in the know, there was a separate meeting that you weren't missing a session. It was a separate meeting that happened that you weren't invited to.
Yeah.
But Ernest, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really agree with Dr. Portia on the point of inclusivity and making sure that this knowledge is democratized to the grassroots level. I am a young person here, and I'm representing the young people on the continent, so intergenerational equity is very important. We have outstanding researchers and scientists on the continent now focusing on that, but I am also very much focused on in-country research. How many of our country research capacity is focused on SRM? If there's going to be any decision globally, I believe the country stakes are very high, and every country would want to represent their own interest based on the impact. So this is a call for our countries to really invest in research in this area. And then also, I feel that inclusion is not inclusion unless we are capacitating the people we are including to make meaningful dialogue. If I call you to the table and I say I'm bringing you on board because I need to include you and you don't understand the subject matter, then I might as well make the decision for you. Mm-hmm. So we should make sure that the people we are including in the subject matter understands what is being discussed to be able to really dialogue meaningfully. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think SRM is happening. I should also say what is not happening on SRM. So we're currently doing the modeling, and in some areas in the global north, we say small-scale laboratory research, small-scale deployment. I don't know what is small yet, but that's it's happening. What is not happening is we don't have a framework, a global framework to regulate, even for small-scale deployment, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe one day we'll get to deployment, but we need to prepare ourselves towards that. We also don't have there's no government that is deploying, no country is deploying on a large scale yet, and happily we have the research in the global south happening. So let's say, bridging the knowledge gap between the North and the South. It may take a while, but we will have to start from somewhere. So happily, Latin America, Asia, Africa, we have research groups that's working on SRM. And I hope that the capacity that we need to build in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America has started. And we need the support, again, of the Global North to move, to drive this forward to a substantial level that we need to be on the table for collective decision and inclusive decision, as Ernest said. If we just put a representation without the capacity, we are not doing much to ourselves. So we need to make this a conscious effort, and I commend Degrees for the support that it has provided to the Global South in this research. It has opened a lot of opportunities for our young people, and also more like an eye-opener, because you go to any policy maker or governments in Africa, in the Global South, and you talk about SRM, you'll be like, what is it that you are talking about? But now it's the knowledge is growing among even policymakers, and I hope slowly we'll get there and taking decisions on SRM research. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have 3 points on this. The first two are my concern about SRM. We know now most governments, countries are focusing on how to adapt to climate change. They are putting a lot of resources, a lot of things there to just adapt. Now, on top of this, the issue of SRM is coming. It's good to let them know. It's good to give them the information so that they can, because when the SRM may disrupt all whatever management that have been put in place. We saw this in one of our studies where we found that implementation of SRM will disrupt all the management in place for droughts over major rivers in Africa. So it's good to carry the policymaker along as soon as possible so that they can match, they can plan better. That's the first one. Then the second one is the different impacts that SRM has across Africa. We also need to carry this stakeholder along to know why. One could say, well, but climate change has different impact. Yes, that has happened. But now when it comes to SRM, and they have to take decisions. For instance, implementation of an SRM technique enhances precipitation over West Africa, but decreases water availability in Southern Africa. So how do we have the president of these regions to support it? And that can create disparity, enmity among these policymakers. So all these things need to be factored in. Then we need to strengthen SRM research in Africa. My colleagues have talked about the areas, but I would like to focus more on the modeling part. So far, modeling is the tool that, models are the tools that we have to really, really study this. And when you look at some of the simulations available, the resolutions of these simulations are too coarse to capture regional and local scale features around in Africa. So there is a need for us to develop capacity in modeling within Africa so that the African scientists will not depend solely on the scientists in developed countries before implementing or before testing ideas of SRM that they may have. So, as I said before, it may be that we may need to implement more than one method. So it's good to start practicing this now locally. So the scientists, the modelers in Africa needs to be resourced, empowered to carry out these simulations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I'd like to turn to audience questions, but I've got a couple of rules. Please check that your question is in fact a question and not a comment. I've seen that quite frequently. My second rule is I'd like my first two questions, at least, to come from African participants. So, if we have any African participants who would like to ask the first question or two. I see one at the back. There's a gentleman there behind you. You'll find a mic coming in. Excellent.
Yeah, thanks so much for the session. So mine is both a comment and a question. Just to give.
It's an African perspective,
yeah, it's
so
basically
that's okay.
to give context to the question. So I'm South African. I'm based here. Welcome everyone. I work for the South African government, and I participated yesterday in the regional discussions. So, from a South African point of view, we generally do not have appetite for geoengineering, and it's not real, and it's not only SRM, but it's geoengineering in general. And our view is wide known, even at a global level. Also, the 2 years ago, the African ministers on environment adopted a decision that called for a governance framework for the non-use of SRM. And this is, for us, it's more because our view is based on the fact that there's more unknowns than knowns when it comes to SRM, and also because it's as if we're treating a symptom and not really the root causes. So my question to African scientists or the panel is, how can us as African scientists and as low-level policy makers, because I'm also a policy maker and a research working for government, how can we sort of get the buy-in from these high-level decision makers? Do we have some sort of short-term or long-term strategy? And how can we sort of allay or address some of the perceived concerns and issues that they have that's associated with the implementation of or the use of SRM technology?
Nana, would you mind?
Yeah, I can probably touch on it. So the important thing is that there's a broader discussion on the risks of SRM. I know the United Nations Environment Programme and the IPCC, they are all discussing the risk. Various governments are also discussing the risk. We all don't know, but what we are looking at is how much it will cost us if we don't know and it is happening. Our fear in Africa is that whether we want to understand it or not, if the global north are convinced and want to deploy, they will go ahead and deploy. They wouldn't want to know whether we agree or not agree. So we need to put ourselves in preparedness. At least we must know if it will affect us, which way it will affect us if there is deployment. We don't have the capacity financially, technically, from the African continent to deploy. It's not going to be anytime soon anyway, if we even will have the capacity. But we know that the global north has the capacity to deploy, even today, if they convince themselves about the risk and all of that. How is that going to affect Africa? This is the question we are trying to answer as researchers in Africa. So the decision we're asking our policymakers to make is not about the deployment itself, it's about helping directing research in these areas that may or has the potential to affect us. So, as discussed, so the IPCC in the 7th cycle and the 7th assessment report outline in chapter 1, working group 1 chapters and working group 2 chapters has called for risk assessments of SRM, which is a fair deal for researchers. This call will need publications assessed. We need to also assess publication from Africa as much as publications are assessed in the global north. Which documentation do we have today? The call is already out, and we need publications to assess. So it is for us in our space within the African continent to get on our desk and write papers, write publications in high journals or high reputational journals for assessment in the IPCC. That's results or those reports go through various global policies like UNFCCC. When we have the Conference of Parties, most of the discussions are centered on the IPCC report. So it is in our interest to actually do research in the SRM and particularly do the risk parts very well to know what is at stake for us.
And could I just add, I mean, I guess the authors who help write those reports, I mean, I guess if you've not written on a subject, you're not going to get picked as an author. So does it help that there are now researchers in Africa and more broadly that have studied SRM and so can be included in those chapters?
Yeah, definitely. So the IPCC report is such that it's open for researchers. So scientists are selected from all over the world, nominated by the governments of their countries and selected by IPCC in writing the report. So there's one is the capacity for Africans to be lead authors in this report. The other is the publications that need to be assessed. So we need to put ourselves in readiness for that as well.
Great.
Yep.
Well, we've only got 5 minutes left, so I want to try and get in a couple more quick questions, and I'll open it up to Beyond Africa. I see a very enthusiastic gentleman there with a great outfit.
I am, in fact, an African. I'm a melanin-deficient African from the city. I may have European ancestors a long time ago, but I am born and bred here. I have a question for the panel in the spirit of provoking robust discussion between Africa and, let's say, the global north, aka white people in Western Europe and North America. In Africa, we're used to working within systems that either, don't exist or are hugely dysfunctional. I'm talking about governance systems in a lot of Africa. Policy is one thing, but what actually happens on the ground is often a very different thing because of, to put it bluntly, corruption, incompetence, failures of certain systems that people, say, in Western Europe would take for granted. What we're seeing in America now is an interesting techno-fascist takeover of government.
Well, can you get to a question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
the question is coming.
Yes.
In Africa, there's often longer discussions than that we have in other places. People like to
well, time is short.
Get into things. I understand that. We have a techno-fascist takeover of the US government, which is very rapidly destroying scientific institutions that do not serve their immediate agenda. So what we are seeing in the States is a destruction of the kind of governance systems within science and the kind of funding systems and the kind of implementation systems that people there have taken for granted for a long time, but that don't exist necessarily or don't function in the same way in Africa. What is your advice on the panel to people in North America that are now facing this destruction of their scientific institutions? What are the lessons you have learned in the ways that you have operated in Africa that might be useful to them? That is my question.
Does anyone wish to take that? Any brave panelists?
Right.
You can go for it.
Okay. What I will say is that we believe in informed decisions, and if we have, I don't want to call it a pressure group, but a group that has come up with results which it should be able to inform governments for decisions. I don't know if this is an advice to the North America, but I think they should know better. Over the years, they have made decisions based on research over the years, probably until recently, I don't know, I cannot tell. But we think that we should make decisions based on research and what is good for the people in the countries where we come from. So,
my advice is that it's a passing phase. So everything that has the beginning must have an end. So within short period, I think effort should build on how to still sustain it until the crisis is over.
Well, I think Portia, Ernest, any final thoughts?
I think the two of them have just touched on what I was thinking. I think Africa has survived well, and now we are at the phase where we really believe in evidence-based decision-making. And so what is the evidence saying, as Nana has touched on? And so I think she rightly puts it, they are up there and know very well the merits from evidence-based decision-making. And also, it's more like the political instability we do have. And so hopefully it's not going to be like one government ends and then another comes and then the agenda also, it throws a lot overboard. And so on that, maybe we should have another platform to have more detailed engagement on that, I would say. Thank you.
Okay, well, conscious of time, one more question there is. Okay, I see a gentleman there on the left. You, sir? Is there someone with a mic that's near him? Oh, you've already got one, have you? Oh, fabulous. Yes, please, Luke.
So Africa is arguably going to suffer the most from and is also the least responsible for climate change. I wonder if the panelists think that the African Union, individual countries, or even an affinity group of young people across countries in Africa, or even a smaller group, should have a unilateral right to deploy SRM, even if the global north attempts to impose a ban.
You get the question?
The right to deploy.
Sorry, come again.
Do you want to deploy solar geoengineering yourself in Africa, or should you have the right to do so, I think is roughly the question.
I think every country is sovereign, and so for now we don't have any global framework to regulate deployment. And so as at now, if you are ready to deploy, probably you can, but we also want to understand the risk. And so no country is ready to do that until we are convinced, we convince ourselves of the risk. If it will be less on us or not, then we go ahead with it. You know, there's always that situation where you have to trade off. So what are we trading off? Is it going to cost our existence? You don't want that. Is it going to trade off water, air, whatever? So we need to clearly understand what will happen if we have to do it. So that's one thing. The other one is the capacity. Obviously, we know Africa, we don't have the capacity to deploy. Even on a small scale, we don't have. And we need our government to even understand. They don't even understand it now. It's a new topic, a new area altogether in Africa. So we have a long way to go before we start thinking about deployment. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's it. Thank you all very much. Thanks to our panelists. And thanks to you all for joining and for the excellent questions.
That's it for this episode of Climate Reflections. Thanks for listening. If you have a question about SRM or just want to find out more, go to our website at srm360.org.